My pleasure to introduce Ruth McCambridge. She has more than 35 years of experience working in and with social justice and community-based nonprofits. For 20 of those years, Ruth learned how to use a bullhorn, mimeograph and a leaflet, knock on strange doors, all skills she has put to good use over the years. In 1987, she took a long-standing interest in organizational dynamics to the Boston Foundation, where she developed a statewide management assistance program for homeless and battered women's shelters and managed the fund for the homeless. She stayed at that foundation for 10 years, helping along the way to launch and manage a number of collaboratively funded capacity building initiatives. In that decade of being ensconced in a major philanthropic institution, many more people laughed at her jokes and gave her honorary class than any other time before or since. Ruth is now the editor-in-chief of the Nonprofit Quarterly, a print and online information source for nonprofit leaders. NPQ is devoted to bringing truth-telling to our work. Is United Way on the wrong track? Let's talk about it. Is billionaire philanthropy threatening democracy? Are discussions about social innovation completely confounding? And what is the new tagline for NPQ? Brave journalism in the nonprofit sector. Sometimes disruptive, always useful. McCambridge believes deeply in the intelligence of the sector, and through the Quarterly, strives to give it a published voice. She still considers herself, at base, an organizer. Her work is motivated by a deep belief in the need for organizations that help people with relatively little influence to develop their individual and collective voice and power. Please help me welcome Ruth McCambridge.
Hi. I am so pleased and flattered to be here today. I had the great good fortune yesterday of traveling around a little bit with Brian and visiting with some organizations around Helena. Oh, okay, and gathering up some stories. So I want to go back to that in a second, but first I want to just say to you who I am to you. The Nonprofit Quarterly is not only covers nonprofits, but is itself a nonprofit. So we're kind of a participant observer in all of the changes that are going on in the nonprofit sector. As you probably know, the nonprofit sector is in some upheaval. It's changing extremely quickly. It's never going to be the same as it was 5 years ago. We're not going to return to a previous state any point in the future. But I'm also part of the publishing environment, which, guess what, is also in an extreme upheaval and is probably never going to return to its previous state at any point in the future. In both areas, there's a great deal of unsureness about what the future is going to bring. It's not like we can say to ourselves, well, this is what we think it's going to look like in 5 years, and be anywhere near accurate. We cannot be. Technology is moving too fast. Relationships are changing. Boundaries are changing between really significant pieces of not just the nonprofit sector, but the environment around the nonprofit sector. And so the Nonprofit Quarterly, basically about 2 years ago, when we realized that we not only had a new, very different presidential administration, but we were also headed into what's turned out to be a very deep and long recession. We realized, and there were other things going on at the same time, we realized that in order for us to be in any way relevant to you, we had to step up our game like crazy. And so from going from being a quarterly journal, which is what we were, sounds very sleepy to me now, we actually overnight began to publish daily. And it was literally overnight. We had had an idea for years that we wanted to do a daily newswire. We didn't really understand what exactly that would look like. If I had said to the staff at any point, you know, before we started doing this, just almost on you know, kind of an impulse, if I had said to them, well, this is going to mean 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes 5 hours more on your daily work, we probably would never have done it. But that's exactly what it's meant. So every day, literally, our, you know, portion of our staff goes, and our board, by the way, goes through hundreds of news reports from all over the country, looking at what it is that's happening in rural areas, on the West Coast, on the East Coast, what's weird about the California budget this week, today, as opposed to yesterday. You know, what's happening in Connecticut, what's happening in New Jersey, what's happening in New York. When we go looking for what's happening in places like Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Alaska, we find less information. Because the press is not covering you quite as well as it is in some of those areas that are more populated and have more press. So, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but one of the things that I want to say is that we literally go through these hundreds of news reports every day, and we come up with a set of stories that we feel give the sector some indicators about important trends that are occurring. So I want to tell you, did anyone read the Newswire this morning? Okay, but next, if I come back, I better see every single hand up, because we put a lot of effort into this. So this morning we had these stories on the Newswire. We had a story about the Litwin Foundation in New York, which is suing the Security Exchange Commission for not paying attention when Madoff was messing around, because they lost $69 million. Why they're only suing the SEC for $19 million, I don't know. I haven't read their complaint, but it's an interesting development in terms of just thinking about philanthropic investments and the risk they're at, and how those investments need to be made in the future, and what responsibility the government has in ensuring that the investment environment is somewhat rational. There was also a story in there, which you may actually have seen, I saw it on TV this morning, about a group of pastors who have decided that they're going to start from the pulpit, you know, advancing partisan politics. Well, it's clearly against IRS regulations, but what they've decided to do is to do a little civil disobedience because they don't agree with those IRS regulations. Those kinds of stories actually give you an indication of where things are at. Because there's movements like that happening all around the country. There's also another story, heartbreaking to me, because I started out partially doing welfare rights organizing, about 240 jobs which will be lost at the end of this week. 240,000 jobs that will be lost at the end of this week. It's part of an emergency, it's an emergency fund that was funded under the Stimulus Act for people on welfare or who were unemployed, just to put them to work. And in a lot of cases, they were put to work in nonprofit.